Olá, eu sou o Rui Brandão, médico e CEO do Zen Club. E estamos juntos com a Exame no Summit Saúde Mental nas Organizações, porque democratizar o acesso à saúde emocional é nossa missão. Desde 2016, ajudamos empresas a definir e implementar as suas estratégias de saúde mental. Nossa solução corporativa já é usada por mais de 200 empresas, como Natura, Ambev ou Votorantim, que têm à sua disposição uma rede de mais de 500 profissionais de saúde mental 24/7, programas de treinamento socioemocional e mapeamento do comportamento dos seus times. A OMS já previa que em 2020 as doenças mentais seriam as doenças mais incapacitantes do mercado de trabalho. Com a pandemia, tudo isso se acelerou. É oficial. Saúde mental deixou de ser um luxo ou um tabu dentro das organizações e passou a ser uma pauta central, com outros temas como sustentabilidade, inclusão e diversidade. O importante é começar. Com o Zen Club você consegue implementar e iniciar a sua estratégia de saúde emocional, sensibilizando lideranças, engajando os seus times e conseguindo medir os seus resultados. Saúde mental não deve ser visto como um tema reativo a um problema. Ter uma estratégia sólida e proativa de saúde emocional é a base para você ter pessoas engajadas, times motivados e uma cultura fortalecida. Não tenha medo de endereçar este tema e lhe garanto que, além do impacto positivo nos seus resultados de negócio, os seus colaboradores e clientes se conectarão ainda mais com a sua marca. Vamos juntos?
Bom dia a todos, sou Pedro Thompson, CEO da Exame, e dou as boas-vindas a todos que nos acompanham aqui no primeiro Summit de Saúde Mental nas Organizações. As questões de saúde mental são a principal causa de perda de qualidade de vida. Em segundo lugar estão as doenças cardiovasculares, em terceiro, o câncer. Além disso, mais de 70% dos colaboradores evitam falar sobre questões de saúde mental no trabalho, o que reforça o estigma que existe em torno do assunto. Por isso, eu tenho a honra de abrir esses 3 dias de debates, que vão de hoje até quinta, dia 10 de dezembro, com debates sobre saúde mental com os maiores especialistas do tema no Brasil e no mundo. E agora tenho o prazer de apresentar a Sofia Esteves, fundadora da Companhia de Talentos e também nossa anfitriã no Summit, autoridade máxima no assunto. Sofia, super bem-vinda, bom dia.
Bom dia, Pedro. Muito obrigada pela carinhosa acolhida. Bom dia a todos que estão nos acompanhando. Muito obrigada por estarem aqui. E é um tema que interessa a todos nós. Nós, executivos, líderes de pessoas, nós pais, nós pessoas, todos nós precisamos falar e falar profundamente sobre esse tema. Então, foi com muito amor, com muito carinho, que nós da Companhia de Talentos, eu gostaria de colocar aqui na tela também rapidamente para vocês conhecerem, nós, o Pedro, que imediatamente aceitou o convite para estarmos fazendo esse projeto junto, a Toya Lorque e Cíntia Gonçalves da Get Ahead estão aqui com a gente, e por fim, a doutora Raquel Conceição, executiva do Einstein, especialista brasileira em saúde ocupacional, saúde mental, e todo esse timão aqui trabalhou forte, trabalhou juntos na cocriação da grade e convite a todos os profissionais internacionais e locais, seja CEOs, os vice-presidentes, diretores, executivos de RH, e os nossos especialistas, psiquiatras, diretores médicos, que vão estar aqui com a gente, estudando a causa raiz e estudando tudo que nós podemos fazer para sair desta colocação e este tema hoje que afeta a toda a sociedade. Então, um beijo para todos, obrigada por estarem aqui. Mandem perguntas, nós vamos estar colocando aqui as perguntas de vocês e bom evento. Obrigada, Pedro. Vamos lá.
Maravilha, Sofia. Super bom dia. Obrigado pelas palavras. Obrigado pelo engajamento no tema. Super importante também. Dando sequência ao nosso summit, vamos abrir com um super painelista aqui, o Jeff. O Jeff, ele é uma das principais referências no assunto e fundador da ONG Minds at Work. Jeff McDonald, ex-executivo, uma das maiores autoridades no assunto. Gostaria de apresentar aqui o Jeff a todos. Jeff, first of all, thank you so much for your participating here in our Mental Health Summit. It's an honor to have you as a speaker. So now you have the word.
Thank you, Pedro. And can you just give me a thumbs up if you can hear me good and well?
So far, so good.
Pedro, can you hear me okay? All
Great.
good. Okay, thank you, Pedro.
So far, so good.
So maybe I should start by just saying thank you very much to Toya in particular for inviting me to participate in your summit today. I have a very strong affinity to Brazil in that I used to work for Unilever, and I used to spend many days in Sao Paulo. I always remember staying in Sao Paulo and doing some beautiful runs in the park in Sao Paulo and mixing with you, the Brazilians. And one of the things that I always loved about coming to Brazil was your ability to show compassion, to bring energy, and to bring color to the world. And in illustration down that we saw, the music, the color, it was a real illustration of Brazilians and life in Brazil. So thank you so much for having me today. When we were preparing my speech today, one of the things I was asked to do was to speak relatively slowly so that everybody can understand and our translator is able to translate what I'm saying to all of you. And so I'm going, being a South African, having lived in South Africa all my life and now currently being in the UK, I've also had to learn to speak a little bit more slowly here in the UK. And so I hope that everybody is able to grasp and hear what I say today. Let me start from a wonderful writer, and his name what are the two most important days in our life? And the two most important days in our life, according to Mark Twain, was the day we were born and the day we find out why we were born. That question, why we were born, hits us all, and in answering that question, it gives us the opportunity to be clear on our purpose in life. Clear on my purpose. And what I've been trying to do since I left Unilever, middle of 2014, is to have a purpose, trying to create a workplace only have the choice to just put their hand up and to ask some help. Ill health. It could be anxiety. It could be bipolar. I want us to have workplaces and countries all over the world where people feel that they genuinely have the choice to just ask for some help if they are struggling with a common form of mental ill health. Now, I don't think that is a very noble purpose. I don't think it's a very ambitious purpose. And let me tell you why. Because in all workplaces, everywhere in the world, people feel that they are able to talk about their physical health. They know that if they are not feeling physically well, they are able to put their hand up and ask for some help. Yet in the 21st century, we still have workplaces all over the world where people find it very difficult to talk about their mental ill health or their emotional ill health. And you know, all of us on this call today are mental. There's nobody listening to me at the summit who's not mental. We are all mental. What do I mean mental? I mean we all have mental health. That is our cognitive abilities, our ability to read a document and remember what we read, our ability to concentrate, our ability to look at some data and analyze the data. That's our cognitive ability. And we all have that. We all have mental health. We all have emotional health. That is our feelings. Feeling some days, other days, depressed, maybe feeling a bit depressed some days, joyful, content, happy, disappointed. Those are our feelings, our emotional health. So we're all mental, we're all emotional, and we're all physical. Yet in the 21st century, we still can't talk about our mental and emotional conditions when we need to. And that can't be right. It can't be right. And the reason I'm so passionate about trying to create these workplaces all over the world is because I have a bit of a story that I want to share with you today. And my story started back in 2008. And you know, I'll never forget, it was my daughter's 13th birthday. She was going to turn 13 on the 26th of January, 2008. And so you can imagine how much excitement there was in our household the night before her 13th birthday, because we're all can resonate and remember to become a teenager. Remember how excited we felt about becoming a teenager, especially if you were going to be the only teenager amongst all your friends. You would wake up the next morning and go to your friends and be able to say, I'm a teenager. And you know, at midnight, the night before my daughter's 13th birthday, I got woken up with a massive panic attack. Now, I had never experienced a panic attack in all my life. In fact, I didn't even know or had a conversation with anybody about a panic attack. Panic attack, I don't think, was part of my vocabulary. I spoke about panic. The ends of my fingers are tingling. The ends of my toes are tingling. My heart is beating profusely. I'm struggling to regulate my breathing. The bed sheets are wet with sweat. And because I'm so naive about this illness, I think I'm about to have a heart attack. And I wake my wife up and I explain to her what happens. And she says, Jeff, why don't you get up, just walk around the room, take some deep breaths. and see how you feel. And so I get up, I walk around the room, I take some deep breaths, and slowly, slowly, the anxiety begins to subside. I get back into bed, but I can't go back to sleep. And the reason I can't go back to sleep is because I have got this adrenaline pumping through my body. I'm also very scared that if I fall back to sleep, it might happen again. And I wouldn't wish a panic attack on my worst enemy. And the third reason I couldn't go back to sleep is because I developed a skill. I don't know where it came from, but I began to catastrophize over the most insignificant issues in my life. I would make a mountain out of a molehill. I remember having a sore on the inside of my mouth. And I remember going to the bathroom at about 3 o'clock in the morning and looking at the sore, getting back into bed and catastrophizing about the fact that I had the beginnings of mouth and throat cancer. And so this catastrophizing, this fear of falling back to sleep, the adrenaline pumping through my body keeps me awake. 7 o'clock the next morning, who comes running into my bedroom? Is my daughter Jennifer. It's her 13th birthday. She's so excited. She wants to open some presents. And all I can say to her, her younger sister, and Debbie, my wife, is please leave me alone. I can't engage in anything that is joyful, that is celebratory, that's got fun in it. All I want to do is take my duvet, I just want to pull it over my head, and I can't get myself out of bed. The girls go downstairs, they open some presents, they go off to school. My wife gets back at about 10 o'clock that morning. Where am I? Still in bed. Still in bed. Now, I'm not the sort of person who's in bed at 10 o'clock of the morning. I'm a typical South African. I love the outdoors. I love going and doing a bit of exercise of a morning. And here I am on my daughter's 13th birthday, struggling to get myself out of bed, feeling paralyzed by the anxiety and degree of sadness that I'm feeling. By lunchtime that day, I'm in a doctor's rooms. My wife has convinced me to go and see a doctor. At first, I didn't want to go and see a doctor. I had no aches. I had no pains. I had no temperature. I didn't want to go and see a doctor. There was nothing physically wrong with me. But she convinced me to go and see a doctor, who then began to ask me a bunch of questions around my sleep patterns, my ability to enjoy the things that I love doing. Do I look forward to stuff? Do I want to be with friends and family? My eating habits. Had I had any suicidal thoughts? And my response to a lot of those questions was, I didn't want to be around other people. I didn't look forward to stuff. I wasn't enjoying doing the things I used to enjoy doing. I didn't want to read a newspaper and read something that was very negative and sad. It used to just trigger me. I'd lost my ability to eat breakfast and lunch because I used to wake up feeling very anxious. I'd lost a lot of weight as a result of that. My sleep patterns were really disrupted. I would wake up 2, 3 of the morning and then I couldn't go back to sleep because I used to lie and worry about things. I'd had some suicidal thoughts. And the doctor asked me, had you planned your suicide? And I said, no, I haven't, but I know the method. And he turned to me and he said, Jeff, you ill. Now I said, what do you mean I'm ill, doctor, is what I said to him, because you haven't done a physical examination of me. You haven't taken my temperature. You haven't looked into my eyes or my ears. You haven't looked down my throat. You haven't put your stethoscope onto my chest. You haven't taken my blood pressure. You haven't done any physical examination. What do you mean I'm ill? And he said, Jeff, you are suffering from anxiety-fueled depression. Anxiety-fueled depression. Me? Depression? Yes, me. And do you know my understanding of the word depression up until that point? The understanding of the word depression for me was I would wake up on a Saturday morning here in the UK. I want to go for a bike ride. It's pouring with rain. And I would turn to my wife and say, I'm depressed. She'd say, why? I'd say, because it's raining outside. I mean, I had no understanding of depression. And here I am on my daughter's 13th birthday, diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. Now, as I leave the doctor's rooms that day, I make a decision that saves my life. And the decision that I made was that I refused to be burdened by the stigma that is associated with this illness, the stigma. And so I told my family, I told my close friends, and I told some of my colleagues at work that I was struggling and had to take 3 months off work because I had been diagnosed with anxiety-fueled depression. Now, the reason that that decision saved my life, not to be burdened by the stigma, is because everybody that I spoke to, everybody who knew about my struggles, do you know what they gave me in return? They gave me the most wonderful outpouring of the most powerful emotion in the world. And do you know what that emotion is? It's called love. Do you know, in my darkest moments, knowing that I was loved, feeling that sense of love from my family, my friends, my line manager, do you know that just knowing that I was loved is what kept me going? And so over a 3-month period, because I had to take 3 months off work, I slowly recover through that sense of feeling loved, a sense of hope. I used to get hope from a friend of mine who I used to meet every 10 days. And he, 2 years prior to my illness, had been so sick, he had been at hospital. I said, do you know what he gave me? He gave me hope. He gave me hope that I could get better. And so a combination of medication, some cognitive behavioral therapy, that feeling of love, sense of help me to, I slipped into Unilever. 2010, I had a bit of a relapse. And then 2012, one evening, I got a call from my wife to give me some devastating news. Was that one of this was October of 2012, 4 years after my crucible moment in life. And you know, when I got home that night, I lay in bed and I thought about my friend. He was wonderful human and compassion to the world, and now he was gone. I thought to myself, why didn't he talk to me? Why didn't he tell me about his struggles? And I came to a very simple conclusion that night. And the conclusion that I came to was that stigma had just killed my friend. He wasn't able to talk to his wife. He wasn't able to talk to his friends about his struggles that he was feeling. And instead, he died by suicide. And I lay there and I thought, that's not fair. How can that be right in the 21st century? What's the difference between me and him? In 2012, there I am, flourishing in many ways. Why? I'd been able to, in getting me better, and he couldn't experience any of that because he was too ashamed, too embarrassed to have the conversation. And instead, he died by suicide. And I lay there and I thought, that is not fair. So that night, individual up with me 10 days later. And ever since the day I met with Alistair, who then began to open some doors, introduced me to some people, which allowed me superb. And that is to create workplaces all over the world, including in your country, in Brazil, every workplace where people feel that they genuinely can talk and ask for some help if they're struggling. I'm not saying to any of you today, being able to have the conversation, he would still be alive today. I'm not saying that for 1 minute. I can't say that. But what I can say is, had my friend been able to just have a conversation, just ask for some help, there's a tiny, tiny chance that he would still be alive today. And you know, ladies and gentlemen, that is worth fighting for every single day of my life. Those out there that are suffering for them, it's worth fighting for them, such that we create workplaces where people feel it's actually okay to not be okay and to have this conversation. So that's why I'm so passionate about trying to create this kind of work, this path filled with a sense of purpose. I wanted to leave you with a few thoughts on what is it that I've learned and what am I learning about how do we go about addressing the stigma of mental ill health in workplaces. And I really understand and know that in Brazil, you are still at the early stages of having this conversation. At the early stages of having this conversation. And you know, 8 years ago, here in the UK, we were also at the early stages of having a conversation. And I would appeal to all of you to think about doing 3 things, all of you, just as individuals, in order to address the stigma of mental ill health. The first thing that you could do, all of you, is you could think and reflect on your own relationship to mental health. Tolerance, where you think people like me are snowflakes. We can't get our job done. We weak. Is that what you think mental ill health is? And if relation read about depression, anxiety, go and talk to somebody who struggled in the past, but just go and be curious, because the more curious you are, the greater the chance of you being more empathetic and hopefully one day truly compassionate. So that's the first thing we could all do, is just reflect on our relationship to this subject. And if we are intolerant, go and be curious. The second thing we can all do, and this is where I think today is such a wonderful start, is we can just start the conversation. Get this conversation going in your families, in your friendship groups, in your workplaces. Just start a conversation about mental health. Because if we can just have the conversation, we call the, and a number of years ago, a president in the United States, JFK, he started a conversation about putting a man on the moon and bringing him back safely. Guess what? It happened. Putting a man on the moon. You can all just start the conversation in your workplaces. What is mental health? What is mental ill health? What is depression? What is anxiety? What are the symptoms? If you can just start be possible for you in Brazil eradicating and addressing the stigma of mental ill health. And the third thing that we can all do, all of us as individuals, is when we feel ready, when we feel courageous enough, maybe, we can all tell our stories, because we've all got a story to tell. We've got a friend, we've got a loved one, we've got a family member. We might have had our own crucible moment in life. And the more stories we can tell, the more we normalize the conversation. And I think it's important to get the permission of that other person before you tell their story, because there's still a lot of stigma around. But storytelling and sharing stories is such a powerful lever in breaking mental ill health. In tell every story is like sending a lifeboat out into the ocean, and the billions of people, when they see that lifeboat, when they hear that story, they cling onto the lifeboat. And you know what they realize? They realize two things. The one thing they realize is they're not alone. The second thing they realize is they are just normal. They are just normal. And you know, as I shared my story with you all today, there's some of you in the audience where that story resonated. There's some of you in the audience who are struggling today, and you heard that story and you felt you were not alone, that you were just not. And the story that I shared with you today gave you a sense of how important it is for all of us to have a sense of purpose and meaning in our lives. And imagine if you could create a sense of meaning in your life, which was about eradicating and missing the stigma in Brazil, in workplaces. In my story, hopefully you heard the power of being able to ask for some help, the power of being able to have the conversation, because asking for help and just having that conversation could just save a life. Finally, the other big insight that I've had over the last couple of years is that mental health is part of our overall well-being. It's part of physical health, feelings, we have mental health, our cognitive ability. And I think more and more organizations have got to begin to see the health of their people as a strategic priority. You know, COVID-19 has showed us that when people are not healthy, they cannot perform. And so how do we begin to elevate the health of our people to being a strategic priority in an organization? Where in organizations, we're enhancing the health of people, because healthier people are more safe. Healthier people are happier. Healthier people are more productive. And you know what? If our health and our energy is the most important driver of our performance in an organization, why would it not be a strategic priority? Because every other strategic priority is about enabling and enhancing the performance of the organization. And if the energy and the health of our people is seen to be an enabler to performance, then we should make it a strategic priority. And I'd love to come back to Brazil one day and share more details around what does it look like if the health of your people was a strategic priority. But the starting point has to be breaking the stigma of mental ill health. That has to be the starting point. And as I said, all of you out there can do three things. You can think about your relationship, you can start a conversation, and you can share some stories. You can share some stories. And I think more and more workplaces in Brazil are going to have to take on this responsibility. Because in talking to Toya, I understand that there's not a lot of government support and government funding to do this. But for organizations to take on this responsibility, to engage and enhance the health of their people so that they perform better. And in order to do so, address the stigma of mental ill health. It will send a message of care, of compassion, which I think has huge impact for an organization in terms of its ability to attract talent, retain talent, engage talent, because people working in that company see that they're working for a company that truly cares about me as an individual. We don't just care about my physical safety, but you also care about my emotional and mental safety. And so on behalf of Toya, the team, I would just like to reiterate and thank you for having me today. And I hope in this conversation that I've had with you today, some of you will, by what I have just said, I might have challenged some of your beliefs around mental health. And in challenging that belief, I hope you go and do something different. For others on this call, I've confirmed some beliefs for you. I've really confirmed some beliefs around mental health, and we can you who I've confirmed to go the extra mile in creating a workplace all over Brazil, family groups, friendship groups, where people feel they genuinely have the choice to just put their hand up and ask for some help if they are struggling with a common form of mental ill health. Thank you.
Jeff, very inspired your words for us. Here in Brazil, we are exactly in the same world trend regarding mental illness. Here in Brazil, in the last 20, 30 years ago, we have eradicated countless disease, precarious condition around the life of our people, but mental health today is the big evil. It's a big evil of the 21st century for sure, mainly here in Brazil. And here in Brazil, in the corporate world, we still have the stigma of the hero journey, the hero leadership, the tough leader, the leader that never fails, the leader that he could not have any empathy with his team, with his managers, and asking a little bit about that. How can we create work environments where people feel comfortable to share their anxieties, their vulnerabilities, and etc.? How can we create this environment?
Pedro, I think there are two things that I've learned in trying to create some of those environments. I think the first one is about education and training in the area of mental health in every single workplace. You know, part of the reason why there is so much stigma is because we are just not educated. We just don't understand what is depression, what is anxiety, what is stress. And so I think that every workplace, you know, Pedro, I often say we spend billions in health and safety. Well, guess what? Most of the billions goes to safety. It goes to keeping people safe at work and training people on how to be safe at work. Well, why don't we take some of that money and train people around health and mental health? Because the more we train people around what is depression, what is anxiety, what is stress, what are the symptoms to look out for? How do I, as a line manager, talk to somebody about mental health? How do I, if somebody's been off sick, how do I, as a line manager, relate to that person while they're away? How do I bring them back to work in a way that they'll continue to flourish when they come back to work? So I think we've got to invest in education and training and training and training. And the more we train and the more we educate, the more we begin to chip away at the stigma. The second intervention in a workplace, I think, Pedro, is to start with some very creative campaigns around mental health and to begin to raise the awareness in organizations and run some creative, compelling campaigns. And you know, Pedro, I think we should make heroes out of people who have suffered from mental ill health challenges in the past. There are many heroes out there, people who've transformed the world. Here in the UK, Winston Churchill was a depressive. He was somebody who struggled with depression. Now, he wasn't a snowflake. He wasn't somebody who wasn't able to take the heat in the kitchen. And so how do we run campaigns? How do we create awareness? How do we make heroes out of people who might have had these struggles in the past, and see the contribution that those people are making to the world today? You know, Pedro, I often get asked, why would you ever recruit somebody who's had a mental ill health challenge in the past? You know, why would I ever recruit somebody who's had a mental ill health challenge in the past? Let me tell you why I would recruit that person. One, that person is probably a better listener. That person is probably more compassionate. That person has overcome a very big challenge in their life, getting through a mental ill health condition. That person is probably a better human being as a result of what they've been through. They're a more human and better human being as a result of getting through that challenge. And you know, Pedro, I would prefer to see human beings leading workplaces, nation states, versus some of the narcissists that we see in those positions today. And so how do we create more heroes and run campaigns around people who've had these struggles in the past, and to show that they're not snowflakes? In fact, they are making a huge contribution to the world, together with education. I think for me, those are the two really big areas that one has to go after in the beginning.
Yeah, perfect, Jeff. And we in Brazil, and in all companies, the most of the companies around the world, in the corporate world, we face here, and some we have some questions of our audience in this line, that in all of the companies you have the COO with the whole KPIs, the manage of the company with the KPIs, with the indicators. You have the CFO with the whole numbers of the company, how we can manage the company with the KPIs, with productivity, with the numbers. But where is the process of to keep the mental health of the organization, the incentives? How can we frame if the organization have a good mental health, have good incentives to people to open themselves about this team and etc.? How can we put this subject inside the management program with the whole incentives, with the whole framework of the organizations?
Yeah. You know, Pedro, I often say that we treasure what we measure. We treasure what we measure. Now, if you look in safety, we measure safety, don't we? We have measures around the safety of our people. And we put those measures in place, and we therefore treasure safety. We should be doing the same thing around health and well-being. We should have measures in place. And you know, there are ways in which an organization now, there are some surveys that I am aware of, where you can survey your organization to get a measure of the health and the well-being of your people. And then you can look at some of the costs that are related to poor health, high levels of absenteeism, presenteeism, people realizing that if they work for that company, they're going to get sick. So they don't want, it's not a very attractive place to work. Low levels of employee engagement. And so I think you've also, for the CEO and the CFO, you have to create that business case. You have to show what poor mental health is costing us in terms of lost productivity, in terms of our inability to attract talent, in terms of our low engagement scores. We need to bring some of those costs to the boardroom. And then to say, if we were to invest in A, B, C, D, and E, let's look at our well-being measure today, and in a year's time, let's see how that has improved. And so I think there is, in some instances, there clearly is a business case that you have to create, and you have to put some of the measures in place. But I think in other cases, there's also a bit around just helping senior people, CFOs, CEOs, helping them see the connection between mental health, overall health, and the performance of their people. And, you know, I work in this area a lot. And so it's obvious to me, that link. But I don't think that it's obvious to all CFOs or CEOs out there. And so I think what we've got to do is we've got to help them understand that link and show the link between healthy individuals who are more safer, who are more happy, and who are more productive. So in some instances, create the business case, put the measures in place, measure your return on the investment. I think in other cases, you know what? It might just be the right thing to do right now. As we come through this pandemic and we see what happens when people are not healthy in our population, maybe the right thing to do is to invest more in maintaining the health of our people. Because if we don't, they can't produce.
Perfect. Perfect, Jeff. Another very important aspect regarding mental health is about education. It's about to break the ice that we have outside of this dim. Okay, and a question of our audience is regarding education and training in companies. How to introduce in the organizational culture and get scale education and training.
Yeah. Look. I think in order to answer the question on scale, I think that you know, some of this training now I'm aware of is available online, and so you can get some of this training, and it can be done online. And by doing it online, you can scale it across the organization. So I don't think scale is a challenge. I think the challenge is, how do you convince the senior leadership that we need to invest some money in training our people around mental health? And I think that does require a conversation, you know, with the executive team, which is one. I think you've got to get some data. You've got to get some measures. You've got to be able to go to that senior team and say, do you know that X% of our workforce is off sick for more than 3 months? And you know what? If somebody's off sick for more than 3 months or 6 weeks, we know it's a mental health condition. 50% of those that are off sick for more than 6 months is related to mental health. And so I think we've got to get some of that data and show what this is costing us. I think we've also got to look at this concept called presenteeism. You know, 1 in 4 of us suffers from a mental ill health condition during our career. So if you've got 100 people in your organization, there will be 25 people that are just present. They are at work, but they are only giving you 30% of their productivity. Not well. Invisible, you can't see it, but you pay them 100%. So you can show the cost of that. What is presenteeism costing us? What is absenteeism costing us? But I think you've got to take that data to the executive team and show them and get some of that data. And then say, do you know what? In order to address some of this, we need to start with education. We need to start with beginning to break the stigma around mental ill health. You know what's so sad, Pedro? Often in my work is I get companies phoning me to start doing some training only after there's been a suicide. So there's been a suicide in the organization. So we have to wait for a suicide before we want to take this seriously. And if we all accept that mental ill health, the World Health Organization tells us that it will be the leading cause of disability in the workplace by 2030 if we don't do something about it. Please let's not wait for a suicide before we want to invest in training. Let's be proactive in doing this and show that we're a caring organization, which will then attract, engage, and lead to enhanced productivity.
Yes. Yes. And Jeff, I think we still have like 7 minutes to the end of our life, but I think that the key actor on all organizations regarding mental health is it is the leaders. Okay, and the leaders,
Yes.
they need to have a lot of humility, a lot of empathy, to be 100% open mind, show their vulnerabilities, and the leader is the central figure on this whole processes. And regarding the leader, and another question of our audience, what's the role of the leader? How can the leader show leadership behaviors that promote mental health?
Yeah, wonderful question. I mean, that's a very big question, and part of the answer is in my. I'd love to come back and share with you some of my thinking about how do we elevate health to being a strategic priority. Now, in order for us to elevate health to being a strategic priority, one of the things we have to do is we have to relook our leadership competency models. So if you think about a leadership competency model and the sorts of behaviors that we expect of our leaders in workplaces, they tend to be behaviors like teamwork, growth mindset, performance orientated, accountability. I mean, those are some of the behaviors we're expecting in leaders, all right? I think we should build in to our leadership development framework a behavior that we expect of our leaders, which is about their own well-being, their own health, bringing their own energy. And so I think we should be more and more have a behavior, an expectation of our leaders, which was one of leaders role modeling how they look after their health, how they are encouraging their subordinates to be looking after their health. And it becomes part of the leadership development framework in an organization. I really, really think, no leader can lead unless they're healthy. So why isn't it part of the behavior that we expect of our leaders, that they are role modeling, that they are sharing good practices, best practices around the importance of health? So I think we have to build it into the leadership development framework. And just finally, Pedro, there's some research that has just been done by an organization called Gallup, Gallup. And they did all this research during the pandemic and saying, as the pandemic comes to an end and we move through this portal into a new world, hopefully, where we leave some of the bad and we bring some of the good with us, what are followers expecting of their leaders today as we are living in the pandemic and as we move through the pandemic? And there are 4 things that followers are expecting of leaders today. The first thing they're expecting is that leaders instill trust. The second thing they're expecting, Pedro, a follower, is expecting a leader to instill hope. The third thing is to instill stability. So people out there, they want hope, they want stability, and they want to trust their leaders. And the fourth thing is they want their leaders to show compassion, And so I think we need to build that into the leadership development framework. On our leaders to show compassion, to show empathy. It's part of leadership in this organization.
Perfect, Jeff. We still have 2 minutes, so I'll make a little closure about our fantastic meeting. For sure, Jeff, for us leader and for the whole organizations today, the white elephant inside our offices or our houses that we need to address for sure is mental health. Any management playbook, any incentives, any bonuses, any capability that we incentive around our employees, around our communities, for sure, is to promote mental health. Mental health today is the main evil of all organizations. So we have a very inspirational moment with you. Fantastic words, wonderful time here. And Jeff, I just to take this last 1 minute, what is the final message that you pass through regarding mental health?
I think the final message, I mean, I've got two final messages, Pedro. The final message is, please join me on my crusade. Please join me on my crusade in trying to normalize mental health in workplaces, in families, and in friendship groups. Join me on my crusade. You know, we are all mental. We are all physical. We are all emotional. And the world needs to understand that we should invest in as much in keeping people physically healthy as we do people mentally healthy. There should be no discrimination between somebody who is suffering from depression and somebody who is suffering with a broken leg. There should be no discrimination whatsoever. And if we can get these conversations going, do you know what? We will save lives. So if for no other reason, join me on my crusade to help save a life by allowing people to have the conversation.
Jeff, perfect. Thank you so much. We are ready in your crusade for sure. Fantastic moment here with you. In the name of our audience, in the name of Exame, we are very happy to have you here as a speaker. Fantastic moment that we had. E a todos da Exame, a toda a nossa audiência, muito obrigado pelo momento, papo incrível, e continuem assistindo o nosso Summit. Ainda temos mais 2 dias de evento, momentos maravilhosos, grandes ensinamentos, grandes lições como essas. Muito obrigado a todos, até já.
A Bradesco Saúde desenvolveu uma série de iniciativas que promovem orientação e cuidado em meio à pandemia de Covid-19. É o Saúde Digital. Com ele, quem tem Bradesco Saúde pode realizar consultas médicas por videochamada sem sair de casa. Veja como funciona. Para dúvidas e sintomas de Covid-19 ou outras questões de saúde, você deverá acessar o app Bradesco Saúde. Se você ainda não tem instalado, faça o download gratuito na App Store ou no Google Play. Para consultas médicas regulares com médicos referenciados, acesse o site bradescosaude.com.br. Confira as especialidades disponíveis para atendimento por videochamada e como agendar sua consulta. Bradesco Saúde, ao seu lado contra o coronavírus.